hope you're having a great day, and let's go into this video, man. It's Outlast. In this today video, we're gonna talk about the full story and background of Outlast. So, let's go. It starts in 1938. US chemical company Murkoff is exposed selling weaponized dysphogene to German forces. At September 6, a report is written in Berlin regarding the progress of Dr. Warnick's work on the morphogenic engine. In 1943, June, during Project Walrider, Warnick records 3 instances of spontaneous bleeding. Half a dozen test subjects began to develop brain tumors. Autopsies reveal the tumors are pure lead. In 1947, Leland Coyle joins the police force in Blackwell, Oklahoma. Sergeant Leland Coyle is a prime asset and one of the antagonists in Outlast trials. He is a corrupt and delusional police officer with a distorted notion of the law who enjoys electrocuting and sexually assaulting people with his shock baton. In 1948, the OSS initiates Operation Paperclip, recruiting scientists from Nazi Germany to conduct research for the USA. In 1949, Dr. Warnick immigrates to the United States as part of Operation Paperclip. At April 30, A. Bradley Avellanos proposes cooperation with CIA to the board of Murkoff, initially in the capacity of chemical refinement for heroin, with the deal posing a great financial opportunity as well as implications of legal protection for the company. A. Bradley Avellanos. Little is known about the exact job title of Avellanos. However, the manner in which Dr. H. G. Easterman and various Murkoff employees treat him in writing, and considering the fact that he seems to be a sort of authority about all things to do with CIA relations, it is safe to assume that he holds a significantly high position in the Murkoff Corporation, even being hinted to be part or having at the very least connections to its board of directors. His status in the company may be compared to that of Jeremy Blair, though Blair's influence only covered all to do with Mount Massive operations only, so Avellanos may be in comparatively higher position. In regular Murkoff employee fashion, Avellanos is shown to be incredibly greedy and prioritizes the maximization of profits above all else, even going so far as to send the thinly veiled threat of exposure to CIA officials after rumors arise that they plan to work with a different pharmaceutical company than Murkoff. Back in 1952, Shirley Pierce is committed to Mount Massive Mental Hospital for hypnotherapy treatments due to bedroom-inspired hysteria and martial issues. Shirley Pierce was one of the Mount Massive's patients in the 1950s who was frequently subjugated to Project MKUltra. The experimentation along with Mrs. Jackson. One of the documents stated that she and Jackson were placed in hypnotic state where Jackson was to remain in a deep hypnotic sleep as Pierce attempted to wake, or failing that, will kill her with a provided firearm, which was actually Shirley Pierce was one of Mount Massive's patients in the 1950s who was frequently subjugated to Project MKUltra experimentation along with Mrs. Jackson. Project MKUltra was a program created by the Central Intelligence Agency for the purpose of researching and developing drugs and producers for interrogation and mind control. Several of these procedures have been deemed illegal, particularly the ones that experimented on subjects without their knowledge or consent. In Outlast universe, a branch of the program was established in the 1950s and operated at the Mount Massive Asylum until its closure in the 1970s, and it's also the focus point behind the Outlast trials. Back in 1953, January 12, H.G. Easterman is interviewed by Jameson Lawler to assess his usefulness for CIA studies on brainwashing subjects of the Korean People's Army in Hong Kong. Dr. Hendrik Joylet Easterman is the primary antagonist of the Outlast trials, one of the Murkoff Corporation's prominent scientists during the Cold War. Dr. Easterman is the director of Project Lathe and its base of operations, the Sinhala facility. Project Lathe was an experiment conducted by the Murkoff Corporation at the Sinhala facility in the 1950s, which involved the abduction of various American citizens off the streets to experiment on them. The whole experiment is disguised as a call for willing subjects. Back in 1953, February 9th, Easterman arrives in Hong Kong to study the methodologies of brainwashing. In 1954, February 10th, Mrs. Jackson and Pierce are subjugated to experiments by the CIA as part of the MK-Ultra program, regarding which they have total amnesia. The experiment stated that she and Jackson were placed in hypnotic states, where Jackson was to remain in a deep hypnotic sleep as Pierce attempted to wake and kill her. She was provided a firearm, which was actually an unloaded pneumatic pistol. Pierce could not wake Jackson and fired the weapon, and having carried out the instructions to the latter, fell into a hypnotic sleep herself. After waking, neither of them remembered any of the events prior to the hypnosis. Pierce is mentioned to have a severe fear of firearms in any form. This is likely why the CIA chose her to use the gun, as they would probably want to test if there was a limit to what MK-Ultra subject would do if it went against their personal nature or beliefs. After the test, she adamantly denied the sequence had ever happened and refused to touch the firearm. In 1954, April 13th, Rodolph Warnick is officially recorded as a citizen of the United States. At April 19th, Dr. Easterman receives an invitation from Oliver W. Barenzek to meet the researchers in Los Alamos. Oliver W. Barenzek was Assistant Director of the Behavioral Medicines from 1954 until 1963, though he was primarily situated in Mount Massive Hospital during the mid to late 1950s. He would have frequent contact with both Los Alamos and Sinhala, acting as a sort of intermediary between the two and higher-ups at Murkoff, holding enough power to decide whether or not to recommend the continuation of Lathe to the board of Murkoff. He seems to have had a cordial to friendly relationship with Dr. Easterman, as later noticed in a letter to him that he hoped the medicine he recommended has the same striking effects on his wife as they do on Irene Easterman. His betrayal indicates that he might have, in July 5th, Airman Jerome Gilliat brutally slays San Antonio family of 5 and molests their farm animals after a woman in white offers him a piece of chewing gum during July 4th celebrations, after the consumption of which he blacks out for several days until law enforcement finds him nude and disoriented among the hogs on the family's premises. In 1955, February 7th, a news article is released stating the following: law enforcement raid Futterland Studios after Felice Futterman's criminal escapes of conspiracy to commit murder, kidnapping, and rack-tracking. 2 officers die, 5 are injured in the process of her being apprehended. Sometime after the fact, Futterman is sentenced to life in prison and committed as an inmate in Holmesburg Prison, Philadelphia. Felice Futterman, better known as Mother Gooseberry, is a prime asset and one of the antagonists in the Outlast trials. She is disgraced, mentally unstable children's show host who is likely to be suffering from psychosis. Gooseberry's alternative personality manifests in the form of her ventriloquist duck puppet, Dr. Futterman, a crude avatar of her abusive father. In November 3rd, Moses Scarpiotti is interviewed by Avellanos, assessing if he is a suitable architect for the environment of Project Lathe in Sinaloa. In 1956, Doctor Bruce Newhouse starts working at Mount Massive on hypnotherapy treatments for patients, during which time he treats Shirley Pierce. Shortly before February 16th, following his surveillance, Clyde Barry goes to interview Coyle in a bar under pretense of bribery. Coyle, however, sees through Barry's cover almost immediately and proceeds to violently assault him, breaking 2 of his fingers and further injuring him very badly in the process, to the point where Barry's urine is bloody after the fact. Clyde Barry was a member of Murkoff's collections department until November 1959, and subsequently the director of historical refinement from 1959 until 1961. His portrait indicates that he is blind in his left eye. February 16. After the altercation with Coyle, Barry retreats to Wichita, Kansas to evade Coyle and take time to heal from the confrontation, as well as deliver his research reports on the policeman's surveillance over telex. On December 13th, Clyde Barry goes to interview Phyllis Futterman in Holmesburg Prison. In 1958, April 15, J. Lawler budgets and authorizes continued research into Dr. Warnick's Project Walrider as part of Project MKUltra. In May until June, the first iteration of Project Lathe fails, with a total of 171 people either dead or injured. Casualties include experimental population, Murkoff, staff, and visitors. The immediate recommendation is for the project to be halted indefinitely. In August 25, Project Lathe 2 is officially authorized after Dr. H. Easterman successfully pitches his proof of concept to higher-ups and Murkoff and Los Alamos. Project Lathe 2. Upon realizing the mistakes of the first iteration of Project Lathe 1, Dr. Easterman wrote in his journal that the subjects his testing would have to be meaningless, with nothing mentally wrong with them, and that he would have to be a symbolic figure. His visage must not be shown to them ever. He conversed with Scarfiotti on how the reagents would need to be completely worthless in terms of society, how they would have to be less expensive to take in, and that this would be the key to creating the sleeper agents. He promised in Project Lathe 1. In a letter to Pranzik, he optimistically states that they are working on salvaging Project Lathe and that the autopsy soon to be performed in the large amount of deceased Lathe subjects should show a correlation between the conditioning and the tumors they have had grown. Unfortunately, it was proven untrue, and Easterman feared that Lathe 2 would not come to be. Nevertheless, Easterman lied to Parenzik and said that the conditioning worked perfectly and the lessons were formed in purpose, and that the funding of Project Lathe is vital. With the board officially authorizing Project Lathe 2, the documented name was changed to Latent Agency Therapy, and the assets of the first project were to be reused. Oversight via Los Alamos and subject from Mount Massive would become minimal, as well as the budget of the project. In 1959, the Murkoff Corporation conducts group experiments for CIA program MKUltra. April 12, Clyde Barry surveils reagent 0877 in San Antonio, Texas, conducting all trigger tests successfully. In June 20, Clyde Berry surveils reagent 0946 in Monesia, Indiana. Over the course of those days, Berry observes odd behavior from 0946 and conducts trigger tests with exceptional results. In June 22, Clyde Berry surveils reagent 0946 in Muncie, Indiana, follows an adolescent girl home, succeed in the viewing of a theater screening of The Beauty and the Beast, at which he had met and approached her among other adolescents. Barry is forced to neutralize him at 11:06 p.m. when he attempts to break into the girl's home. July 1. Reagent 0877 is sent to Los Alamos to be studied due to his unusually long post-life to survival. Oliver Barinzik is put in charge of his processing. August 7. Clyde Berry surveils reagent 1616 in Fort Worth, Texas. It is the 11th day of his surveillance, and 1616 has been fired from his job in a shoe department store after groping a customer. Trigger tests are passed exceptionally. Berry observes a number of behavioral oddities from 1616, of most note being him holding a metal object to his eye and turning in circles until he arrives at an estimated heading of 315 degrees. At August 9, Reagent 1616 sells all his possessions and heads to Albuquerque, New Mexico. In August 10th, Clyde Berry surveils Reagent 1616 in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He applies for a job as a coupler and photographer. 1616 murders a sex worker he had propositioned for her services after a trigger test is conducted successfully, though the lethal outcome was more or less accidental as Berry could not interfere quickly enough. At August 11th, Clyde Berry surveils Reagent 1616 in Albuquerque, New Mexico. 1616 shows no memory of what happened the previous day. Instead, he resumes his compass-like behavior, this time heading approximately at an angle of 290, a heading which Berry notes is just shy of the location of Sinala. At August 28, Easterman makes note of Warnick's recurrent visits to the sleep room in Sinala, even participating in Reagent's paralytic trauma therapy. At September 2020, Program Jester is discussed between Lawler and Avellanos. October 1, Program Jester is proposed to the board. October, Program Jester has officially been approved and authorized for implementation in Sinala. At November 6, Clyde Berry offers up his resignation from his post in Collections Department after a particularly violent encounter with who is presumed to be a reborn agent he was surveilling. He yet offers to be resigned to a different department as he is eager to continue his work for the Murkoff Corporation. At November 18th, the Department for Historical Refinement is established following a meeting between Clyde Berry and Avellanos. November 20, Clyde Berry reviews leaked documents from the trial environment and brings it to Easterman's attention just how inaccurate his spelling and dating of otherwise important documents really is, much to the latter's annoyance. In 1961, May 21, Father Clark conducts sermons for patients at Mount Massive Asylum. In 1964, Shirley Pierce ceases being a patient at Mount Massive. In 1965, Bruce Newhouse leaves employment at Mount Massive. In 1966, November 26, Sullivan North works as a shoe salesman in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He receives his first vision from God while listening to the radio. In 1967, three scientists are murdered by an unknown patient at Mount Mass Asylum for the criminally insane. Authorities ordered the asylum to cease all activities. North and his followers live commonly on a luxury ranch owned by a wealthy woman named Lydia D. John. He records the Gospel of North. With a warrant for health and safety violations, New Mexico police raid the ranch and arrest a dozen cult members. North barely escapes with a handful of followers. In 1968, Mount Mass Asylum ceases operations. Murkoff buries evidence of its crimes. In 1969, Sullivan North sacrifices an eye in exchange for his vision of Temple Gate. He and his followers caravan out into the Arizona desert. In 1971, Mount Massive Asylum is shut down amid a scandal and government secrecy. Sullivan North and his followers built Temple Gate in the Havasupai Indian Reservation. In 1972, unknown date, CIA Director Richard Helms orders all MKUltra files destroyed. A small number of documents survive. In 1978, Murkoff expands mind control programs for public testing. Mass suicides ensue. In 1985, December 27, Dr. Warnick conducts an exit interview in Los Alamos, New Mexico, regarding his work in the morphogenic engine and Project Wallrider. In 1987, Paul Marion passes the state bar exam in Ohio. Paul Marion is one of the Murkoff Corporation's former mitigation officers who worked alongside Pauline Glick. The duo was known collectively as the Pauls. He is the main protagonist in the comic series of Outlast, the Murkoff account. After a few years, in 2000, Joanne Marion dies in the hospital of the rare blood disease she shares with her daughter Alice. Joanne Marion is the wife of Paul Marion. Alice is their daughter. In 2006, the Murkoff Corporation purchased the Spindletop Psychotherapy Clinic in Hatton, Texas, as part of Jeremy Blair's research through charity initiative. In 2006, the Murkoff Corporation purchased the Spindletop Psychotherapy Clinic in Hatton, Texas, as part of Jeremy Blair's research through charity initiative. 2007, Simon Peacock leaks Murkoff files and disappears. Simon Peacock is a mysterious character who appears at the very end of Outlast Whistleblower. Peacock was a former Murkoff Corporation and presumably a test subject who was voluntarily experimented on as a rough draft of what would become the Wallrider, meaning that, while he not as powerful, he possessed some supernatural abilities, like being able to sustain a heavy amount of gunfire from the poles. After his conscience caught up with him, Simon decides to go against Murkoff, founding viral leaks and working on an independent journalist. Following his escape from Mount Mouse Asylum, Whalen contacts a man who is associated with an independent journalist organization and media leaking website. After going over the asylum's footage and assuring the Park family of their safety, Simon informs Whalen of what kind of damage his video recordings can do to Murkoff, but notes that he'll end up as one of their prime targets. As a result, Whalen ultimately decides to take the risk and upload the video despite Simon's warnings. In 2008, Paul Marion and Pauline Glick are pardoned as Murkoff Insurance Mitigation Officers. 2008, July, Dr. Wernick moves to the Mount Massive Preserve to do charitable work for the Murkoff Corporation. In the late of 2008, Marion and Glick solved the Hatbox murders at the Spindletop Psychotherapy Clinic. The Hat Box murders were a series of murders that occurred somewhere between the late 2000s and early 2010s in Hatton, Texas. The homicides were carried out by Chris Walker, a psychologically scarred war veteran who was indirectly subjected to Murkoff's illegal experiments. In order to hide their involvement from the public and law enforcement, the company had two of their mitigation officers plant evidence at Omar Abdul Malik's apartment, framing him for the incident, which led to his lifelong incarceration. Let's go into the details of the Hat Box murders. 2 years prior to the event, Murkoff Corporation bought Spindletop Psychotherapy Clinic as part of Jeremy Blair's research. Through charity initiative, the company had a government contract to help returning war veterans cope with PTSD. However, Murkoff's sole goal was to conduct illegal experiments on patients within their jurisdiction. Sometime after Chris Walker, a discharged U.S. military police officer with declining mental health, was hired at the hospital by Murkoff as a security guard, where he was assigned to record and monitor the doctor's therapy session with their patients without their knowledge. This indirect exposure only deteriorated Chris' mental stability. Walker's previous occupation with security, which revolved around scanning hands and retainees, was amplified to a psychotic level to the point where he felt the need to collect heads and other body parts. The first three murders, John Powers, Priscilla Clark, and Martin Belmont, were all patients at the clinic. All three murders occurred separately from one another. Walker dismembered each body and stuffed their severed heads inside collars that he would keep at his residence. As the killings started to garner attention, Murkoff sent two of their mitigation officers, Paul Marion and Pauline Glick, to investigate the incident and prevent further financial losses. The two met up with Dr. Claymore, the clinic's psychotherapist, who was not under Murkoff's influence and had no interest in cooperating with the two agents without a warrant. After being stonewalled by Claymore, the two head over to the surveillance room to review their sessions. One of the guards directs them to Chris Walker, who showcases the footage to the Pauls of the recently deceased victims. As Paul wonders if there were any violent incidents in the past, Walker pulls up a recording of Omar Abdul Malik, which shows him attacking Claymore during one of their sessions. Upon returning, they find Claymore's mangled, decapitated corpse in his workplace and a destroyed surveillance system. As the killer's motivation was the culmination of all sessions, the two concluded that the perpetrator is Chris Walker, as he was the only other person who heard everything the patient said. The two breaks into Chris' house and discover three collars, each stacked with one of the victim's head and a fourth empty one, reserved for Claymore. As Pauline calls for their security team, Walker returns home shortly after only to discover the Pauls lurking through his belongings. Glick pulls a gun on him but gets quickly intercepted and thrown against the wall. As Walker proceeds to strangle Paul, Glick fires a round through the enraged man's jawline. This only infuriates Walker as he knocks her through a window before Marion manages to get to his gun and fire off two shots. Chris, still standing, tackles Paul to the ground, exclaiming "Little pig." But before he can get to Marion, Pauline starts up the car and crashes into him. Once Chris was incapacitated, the Pauls cover up the crime and arrange for Walker to be transferred over to the Mount Massive Asylum. They then sort Claymore's head into the final cooler and place all four of them in Umar's apartment. Malik is framed for the murders and is sentenced to life in a supermax prison sometime later. Whilst confessing his crimes to a state officer, Paul Marion describes their efforts as flimsy evidence-wise. But note that Umar's name and skin color did the heavy lifting. Back in 2009, Mount Massive Asylum is reopened by Murkoff Psychiatric System for charitable work. Chris Walker is interned as patient. William's Hope mother Tiffany, known as Billy Hope, responds to an advertisement for free psychiatric care in the paper to get her son to help for his clinical depression and disordered sleeping. In February 28, Dr. Wernick is officially pronounced dead at the Mount Massive Preserve. In 2010, Markov has issue with female employees experiencing psychosomatic pregnancies based upon the morphogenic engine interaction with the immune system. Melissa Chu files a lawsuit against Murkoff regarding the termination of her contract at Mount Massive Asylum based on gender selection. November 1st, Frank Manera starts consultation for the morphogenic engine program. Manera was part of Project Wallrider. His first patient consultation was November 1st in 2010, and by August 29, 2012, he had dropped from 228 pounds to 155 pounds. In his patient report, it is noted that by 2012, he was lethargic and largely non-responsive, exhibiting interest only in hypnotherapy. Script Part 9, concerning drinking blood from the chest of sleeping men, which could hint at his cannibalistic ways even before the Wall Riders break out. He also refused baths and other attentions from the barber apart from amnesia, stating, "If I cannot partake, I cannot share." His patient documents also mention that forced nutrition would be recommended for Manera if they could not find something he likes to eat. Yet another nod towards his cannibalistic ways. He would not eat because he craved humans. His patient's reports also mentions that he had a history of smoking tobacco and marijuana. In 2011, January 28, Chris Walker starts consultation for morphogenic engine program. 2012, October 4th, an anonymous employee at Mount Massive complains to Human Resources on safety conditions at the hospital. The Poles are sent to the asylum to investigate. At October, Richard Traeger is fired from his post as an executive in Mount Massive and interned as patient of the morphogenic engine program. Richard Traeger. Prior to his involuntary commitment, Traeger was the head of business development at Mount Massive Asylum and an executive of research development for the Murkoff Corporation. Traeger was also a close friend with Jeremy Blair, as Whalen finds a document about that, which proves that they were companions and used to golf together. Prior to the events of Outlast and Outlast's whistleblower, mitigation officers Pauline Glick and Paul Marion are called in to investigate an HR complaint at Mount Massive. When the Pauls meet Traeger, he is acting jovially to be a team player and wanting the two of them to be on Team Rick. Richard also harasses the female investigator multiple times. Traeger claims that no one in his department is responsible for the leaks. During the conversation, Marion secretly signals to Click that he considers Traeger to be dirty as a hobo shit. To get more information, Click asks Traeger whether the two of them could meet for dinner. Traeger accepts. While dining at a restaurant, Traeger explains that as a child, his father tried to convince him not to become a doctor. Afterwards, Traeger drives Pauline back to his place, where he offers her cocaine. When she declines, he offers her scotch, which she also declines in favor of red wine. While Traeger is busy getting the wine from his cellar, Pauline searches his house and finds Traeger's internet passwords, magazines, guides on how to perform surgery, and a pamphlet for an abortion clinic. While drinking, Pauline recognizes a sour taste and realizes that Traeger spiked her drink with ropenol. Pauline responds by pulling her gun on Traeger and points it at his genitals, forcing him to drink the rest of the drugged scotch. Traeger passes out almost immediately. Pauline then calls Paul to pick her up from Traeger's house. After leaving Traeger's house, Pauline calls Paul and the two confront pregnant Murkoff employee Michelle Haas as the source of the leaked information. Michelle reveals that Traeger raped her and got her pregnant. Traeger had then forced her to either get an abortion or to get fired, as she could tell no one without the risk of Traeger firing her, and she could not take care of a child without her job. Michelle had decided to send the email with the hope that Traeger would be blamed and fired. Paul then made sure a severance package was made for Michelle in exchange for her silence. This way Michelle was able to keep her child and would be able to care of it without working for Murkoff. Michelle agreed, but when she visited Jeremy's player with the investigators to revoke her security clearance, a furious Traeger stormed into the room, calling the two investigators lying bitches, claiming that Michelle cannot prove anything. He grabbed a pair of scissors from a nearby table and viciously stabbed her in the stomach multiple times, severely wounding Michelle in the process. Paul then attacked Traeger and took him to the ground. In the scuffle, Traeger accidentally stabbed himself in the leg with scissors, and Pauline subsequently grabbed Traeger by the neck and ran his head against a paper shredder, ripping out his long hair and scarring his scalp in the process. Afterwards, Traeger was apprehended and taken as an inmate and used as a test subject for the morphogenic engine. Despite having been his friend, Blair personally watched when Traeger was dragged into the machine, kicking and screaming, and smiled sadistically while watching. In 2013, Miles Upshur is fired from the Denver Eagle for his article on the war in Afghanistan. In the same time, Murkoff's subsidiary Heartland Springs charity begins constructing 3-bolt water purification plants in Detroit. Helen Granat begins removing Warnick from structural and financial system at Mount Massive Asylum. 3 patients transformed from Project Wallrider at the Mount Massive Asylum to the Zickner facility. Jennifer Rowland requests reassignment from Mount Massive and is involved in experiments at Bimble Gate. Jennifer Rowland is just a scientist who works for Murkoff. January 7th, 3 more members of Timblegate are sent to live with the Scald. Val takes 7 more orphans under her care, over 40 orphans in total. February 14th, Eddie Glaskin starts consolation for morphogenic engine program. March 9th, Val sacrifices 6 orphans. She receives more visions regarding the infanticide Sullivan North commits for this testament of the new Ezekiel. She starts to question her commitment to the faith. In May 9th, Miles Upshur published his article The Devil's Bargain on the history of Murkoff Corporation manipulation of the global water crisis and human rights violations. Soon, from 17 until 19, Val's vision of another god became clearer and she fully embraces her own faith, taking other heretics with her as she departs the testament of the new Ezekiel. At September 17th, Wayland Park leaks information regarding the experiments at Mount Massive Asylum to Miles Upshur. He is consequently arrested and proceeds as a patient. September 18th, the Mount Massive Asylum incident takes place. The events of Outlast and Outlast whistleblower occur. The Mount Massive Asylum incident was a massacre of the staff of Mount Massive Asylum incident was a massacre of the staff of Mount Massive Asylum and took place a few hours prior to the start of the original story and is witnessed firsthand by Wayland Park, resulting in the establishment being overrun by the variants. Let's delve into the background of that story. In seeking to create a perfect Wallrider, Murkoff Corporation used the morphogenic engine to conduct a series of experiments on the asylum's patients through dream therapy, which caused a number of physical deformities and severe psychological trauma. Another effect it has make them stronger. Billy Hope, one of the patients, managed to control the Walrider by self-directing the lucid dream states, allowing him to wreak havoc on the facility. Once Billy took control of the Walrider, he used the entity to slaughter Murkoff personnel and patients within the facility. In the ensuing chaos, many variants escaped, and they too began wreaking homicidal havoc in their extremely unstable state of mind. The security forces desperately tried to quell the attacks and stop the patients, but ultimately failed, losing the facility to the inmates as the emergency evacuation was put into action. Following their initial failure, Murkoff dispatched a group of private military contractors who arrived in the midst of chaos and with riot gear and trucks. Despite being well armed, the teams were soon slaughtered by the variants and the Walrider. Many of the escaped patients started to freely roam the asylum with no set purpose. Some of them took in a sort of a religion, like Father Martin, and started to worship the Walrider as their god, thinking it was a god. These variants became followers of Father Martin, who was attempting to release the Walrider into the world. But there's also other people like Chris Walker, another escaped variant, was trying to prevent this from happening. Many variants enacted their murderous revenge against the Murkoff personnel, whilst other patients participated within the chaos. A number of inmates committed atrocities such as cannibalism, necrophilia, genital mutilation, and physical torture. So there won't be any confusion. I'm going to talk about the incident of Outlast 1, and then I'm going to talk about the incident in detail of Outlast Whistleblower. Without further ado, let's delve into it. Miles Upshur, a freelance journalist, receives a tip-off from an anonymous source about Mount Massive Asylum, a psychiatric hospital owned and operated by the Murkoff Corporation. Upon gaining entry to the asylum, he finds the bodies of the asylum staff strewn about the hallways and the now escaped inmates, known as the variants, roaming the grounds. Progressing through the upper dormitories, he encounters an impaled tactical officer. In his dying moments, tells the journalist to get out of the asylum while he still can. Exiting the dormitories, Upshur is attacked by a powerful inmate named Chris Walker, who throws him through a window and down to the atrium. Upon regaining conscience, he encounters Father Martin, an inmate who believes he is a priest. Martin says Upshur was sent by God to be a witness to his cult and has to stay in the asylum, and then departs as Upshur passes out again. Awakening, Upshur starts his attempt to find a way out of the building while avoiding attacks from Walker and the other inmates. However, as he attempts to unlock the main door from the security control panel, he is ambushed and sedated by Martin, who again states that he must remain at the asylum and witness the events there. Martin shows him footage of the asylum's security forces being slaughtered by a mysterious, seemingly supernatural entity known as the Walrider, before transporting a now unconscious Upshur to the asylum's holding cells. Upshur is forced to work his way upwards through the sewers after encountering a pair of inmates who expresses a desire to kill and eat him. However, the duo abstain from attacking for the moment, as Martin has asked them not to harm the journalist. Upshur makes his way through the sewers while avoiding attacks from the hostile inmates, finally reaching the asylum's showers. While attempting to escape through the showers, however, he is attacked yet again by Walker and escapes through the vents. Progressing further through the building, Upshur is soon chased into a corner by several inmates, but escapes through a dumbwaiter, only to be captured by one of the asylum's psychotic inmates, fashioning himself as a doctor, Richard Traeger, who collects body parts from the patients Traeger imprisons Upshur, strapping him to a wheelchair and slices off 2 of his fingers, using a large pair of shears. Upshur manages to escape and a chase ensues, followed by a struggle when a Traeger breaks into the moving elevator, but Upshur pushes him out, causing Traeger to become stuck between the elevator's gates and is ultimately crushed between floors. Encountering Martin again, Upshur exits onto the asylum grounds, but he is chased back inside by the Wall Rider, revealed to be a ghost-like being which Upshur can only see with the using of the camera night vision. He is forced to circumvent the ruined stairway to access different floors of the building by following a trail of blood Martin left for him to follow. Upshur finally locates Martin in the asylum's chapel to witness the latter's death, self-immolation on a crucifix, before taking the now reappeared primary elevator down. Martin tricks Upshur, however, and instead of taking him to the exit, the elevator takes him to an underground military facility beneath the asylum. While searching for an exit, Upshur is chased by the Wall Rider and finds Walker on the other side of a door he runs through, who incapacitates him. However, before Walker can kill the journalist, the Wall Rider attacks and brutally kills the inmate before leaving. Upshur proceeds into the facility and meets Dr. Warnick, originally believed to be dead. The scientist is in charge of the entire experiment known as the Project Wallrider. Warnick explains that the Wallrider is the result of nanotechnology experiments. Warnick explains that the Wall Rider is the result of nanotechnology experiments conducted on an inmate called Billy Hope, and that the Wall Rider is controlled by Hope. Warnick orders Upshur to find Hope in the laboratory and kill him by shutting off his life support system, thus killing the Wall Rider. After accomplishing this task, Upshur is caught by the Wall Rider, who brutally beats him. Limping towards the exit, he is confronted by Warnick, who is accompanied by several armed guards who repeatedly shoot Upshur. As Upshur collapses to the floor, the screen fades to black, and Warnick's voice is heard as he realizes Upshur has become the Wall Rider's new host. Panicked gunfire screams and mauling sounds are then heard briefly before the credits roll. During the events of Outlast 1, Outlast Whistleblower take actions too. So let's start. Waylon Park is a software engineer working at the Mount Massive Asylum for the Murkoff Corporation. After several encounters working directly with the morphogenic engine and witnessing the torture that Eddie Closkin endured, he decides to send an email to Miles Upshur, reporting the corruption of the Mount Massive. Shortly after sending it, he is caught by his employer, Jeremy Blair. As punishment, Blair has Park committed and forced to endure the tests of the morphogenic engine. However, after the Wall Rider breaks free and begins causing chaos at Mount Massive, Park manages to escape his restraints, taking a camcorder with him. He roams the facility as surviving guards and personnel try to escape from the newly freed prisoners, trying to find a radio that he can use to contact the authorities. During this time, he consistently eludes a bearded cannibalistic prisoner named Frank Manera, who wields a mechanical circular saw blade and tries to kill him, including trapping him in a furnace. Just as Barrick manages to find the radio, Blair appears and destroys it, insisting that no one can reveal the secret of Mount Massive. He leaves Bark to die at the hands of Chris Walker, only for Bark to escape. Bark eventually wanders into a secluded area of the vocational block where a variant by the name of Dennis, inflicted with dissociative identity disorder, captures and offers him as a sacrifice to a prisoner named Eddie Closkin, whom he calls the Groom. While initially eluding Closkin, Bark falls into an elevator shaft and gets a piece of debris lodged in his right shin, reducing him to a limp. Bark is eventually captured, where he discovers how Gluskin repeatedly tortures and mutilates male prisoners' genitals, treating them like his brides before brutally killing them. He attempts to kill Park in the same way, but Park manages to escape at the last second with the help of another prisoner who attacks Gluskin after Gluskin kills the other prisoner and returns to kill Park by hanging him in a gymnasium full of hanging bodies. Park puts up enough resistance so that Gluskin is caught up in the multiple ropes of his pulley system and eventually impaled by a metal rod. As daylight finally breaks, Park continues throughout the asylum, discovering that Murkoff's military forces have already arrived at the scene and are killing every person they see. Park manages to elude them as they are killed by the Wall Rider and makes it to the main atrium. There he finds a wounded player lying against the front door and pleading for help. However, as Park approaches, Player stabs him in the stomach with a knife, declaring that no one can know the truth. But before he can deliver the finishing blow, he is attacked and killed by the Wall Rider. Park staggers out the open front door and past the military vehicles towards a red jeep waiting by the security gate. Yes, the same jeep that Upshur had came with. As Park enters the jeep and starts it up, he notices a dark figure. It's Miles Upshur's Wall Rider, sustained broken body, slowly exiting the asylum with a dark mist surrounding it. He manages to escape and slams through the entry gates just as the figure exits the asylum. In the epilogue scene, a fully recovered Park has gotten in contact with Simon Peacock and submit his secret information on Murkoff too. Park is sitting at a laptop with the video file of all his recorded video from the asylum ready to be uploaded to the internet. A man associated with the leaking website standing in front of his desk informs him that it will be more than enough evidence to ruin the Murkoff Corporation. That man is Simon Peacock, but warns Park that doing so well will result in Murkoff doing everything it can to punish them in return, including threatening his family. Despite some initial hesitation, Park ultimately decides to take the risk and uploads the video, as the credit rolls once he closes the laptop. Shortly after that, Paul Marion and Pauline Click investigate the Mount Massive Asylum incident. They search for Wayland Park to prevent leaks incriminating the Murkoff Corporation, but are unsuccessful unfortunately. In the late of September, a few days after the Mount Massive incident, the Pauls follow Miles Upshur's bank account activity to Northrop, Colorado. They meet William's Hope mother, Tiffany Hope, and discover he survived Mount Massive. Murkoff believes they eliminated Billy's manifestation of the Wall Rider, but Paul is not certain after he witnesses switch host to a colony of ants. Yes, you heard me correctly. The Wall Rider can change his host to a colony of ants. Anyway, Paul Marion conducts a forensic gaslight to discredit Wayland Park's video. The Pauls investigate Miles Upshur's residence in Washington, D.C. A neighbor states she has seen him, although he has been pronounced neutralized by the Murkoff Corporation. So, is he alive or not is unclear. The ant colony from Colorado destroys any evidence left in Upshur's residence. Paul discovers that they are being followed by Simon Peacock. Peacock gives Marion coordinates to Temple Gate and asks for his help in destroying Murkoff, but Paul refuses. In October, Simon Peacock contacts Paul Marion at his residence with the coordinates claiming his daughter Allison is connected to the experiment being conducted at Temple Gate. Paul chooses to disregard Pauline's order not to investigate and flies to Arizona. He follows the coordinates and falls under the effects of the radio tower. He encounters Anna Lee and her uncle Paul, whom he kills in their confrontation. He passes out from his wounds as Anna Lee flees. Anna Lee is found wandering on a stretch of the highway, ultimately picked up and taken to a hospital where she is found to be pregnant with a remarkably healthy baby boy and have sustained similar brain injuries as patients of Mount Massive Asylum. Paul Marion is also taken to the same hospital. Then Paul Marion comments that the tattoo in her chest is the countless wheels of Ezekiel. Upon hearing this, Anna awoke suddenly and became hysterical, ranting about Noth, the new Ezekiel, taking and killing her baby before having a seizure. Marion ran to get a doctor, but she was killed by Pauline Click to prevent Murkoff's involvement in Temple Gate from going public, having recognized Anna as a victim of Murkoff by her ramblings. The circumstances of her fate piqued the curiosity of the investigative reporters Len and Blake Langerman, and ultimately resulted in the beginning of their investigation surrounding her suicide, which leads us to the incident of Outlast 2. Blake Langerman and Lynn Langerman take an interest in the Jane Doe story, which Jane Doe is the unknown name for Anna Lee. Pauline assigns Paul to the case to prevent the Langermans from uncovering the truth of Anna Lee's murder. He does not prevent their investigation. Paul goes home to see his daughter, only to find her bedroom empty, save for a message written in blood on the wall: "You work for us now," and a severed finger and a puddle of blood in front of her bed. Meanwhile, Pauline tries to find the body Paul left in the desert to get rid of another piece of evidence, but to no success, because the night before, Martha found the body and dragged it back to Temple Gate. Simon Peacock kidnaps Marion's daughter, which prompts Marion to fall into a trap. He is captured and then disappears. Later, Peacock questions Marion on the whereabouts of Miles Upshur and William Hope, and explains that imprinting religion into someone works just as effectively as the morphinic engine torture does. He then makes a little prayer. The story began with a voice calling out to Blake and then screaming. Blake is awakened by his wife Lynn, who says he was screaming some other woman's name in his sleep. They are in a helicopter and are inbound to a location where the duo wants to investigate. Blake tells Lynn he was dreaming of Jessica Gray, a student they knew from childhood. Lynn stated she hasn't talked about her in ages, then tells Blake that they should start making an intro for their piece on Jane Doe. They have a small debate on how she died until Lynn decides to reshoot in the middle of the intro. A bright flash of light appears in front of the helicopter, and then the aircraft goes down with Blake, Lynn and the pilot screaming for their lives. Blake then wakes up in his old school, which is a Catholic grade school, St. Sepul to be exact. Blake follows a mysterious man until he reaches a set of doors, which then slam on him. As he turns around, he sees a young girl, and behind the girl is a large rush of blood. Waking up to the crash, Blake frees himself from under a door and traverses to the main helicopter body. He then walks over to the pilot and is horrified by the gruesome discovery. Their pilot was skinned and fixed to a cross. He discovers a town which seems deserted, but the townsfolk seem to be initially avoiding him. Around him are dead cows, recently killed. Soon, he goes down a certain area and sees the remains of dead infants. After walking out of that, Blake goes outside and hears someone speaking cryptically, which turns out to be Martha. Blake carefully avoids Martha as he continues his journey onward. Blake feels the flash of light again, and villagers who were trying to maim him get disoriented, so he escapes. He eventually discovers a church. He hears a strange old man who has captured his wife. Lynn tries to reason with them, but to no avail. After Blake finds Lynn, it is discovered that she, her baby, and her husband must be killed, for Lynn's baby is the Antichrist. Blake is confused as he had no idea Lynn was pregnant, and he wants to talk about whatever happened, but Lynn doesn't want to. Lynn is in great pain, and they momentarily pause. Blake is very concerned for his wife, but then the cultists unfortunately catch up to them Amidst both of them struggling, another group of people come around and kill the cultists. They are called the heretics, who are led by the extremely lustful Val. Though Val is referred to as a man, she seems also to be a woman. Val calls Lynn mother and rejoices in her womb, carrying the Antichrist. Val then licks Blake's face and says she knows she will be seeing him again. Val captures Lynn and takes her away, making Blake go after her. Both the cultists and the heretics have deeply wounded him. He seemingly has a head wounded and is seeing in double. Blake falls down, and then he approaches a man named Ethan. Ethan is not a heretic, but he is also an unborn by the cult. He says he denied Noth, and he denied his 15-year-old daughter, Anna Lee. Noth still had sex with her, and then demanded his child as the Antichrist, and wanted Anna Lee murdered. Blake then realizes that their John Doe is Anna Lee, Ethan's daughter. Ethan had helped her to escape outside so she could have a chance surviving. Then Ethan eagerly asks Blake if Anna Lee is still alive. Blake lies, not wanting to break the man's heart. Ethan lets Blake hide under the root cellar of his house. Blake falls asleep. He dreams of Jessica. Blake awakens and hears Martha brutally interrogating Ethan for answers. Ethan denies knowing where Blake is, so Martha impales him and leaves. Blake hopes he found his daughter and thanks him for not revealing him. Blake then runs through the temple gate. He picks up a document about the town and is seemingly losing his sanity. After some chases, Blake comes into a church. There is a man there, Josiah. Josiah's eyes have been gouged out, and his chest has the word Judas carved into it. Josiah begs Blake to kill him, so the cult won't have a reason to torture his wife, Mary. Yet, Blake hides in the confessional upon hearing someone coming. North then brings Mary, who is barely dressed, and proceeds to have his men torture her on a rack. Josiah reluctantly reveals that Lynn was taken to the mines by Val. After that, both he and Mary are brutally killed. Blake comes out of hiding and is chased by the cult members. He now knows he has to get to the mines to reach Lynn. The road is long and he is attacked by Martha and his townsfolk. He is attacked by Martha and townsfolk. Blake then, as he is crossing the bridge, sees the locusts and falls down and must take the long way to the mines. Throughout the game, Blake has psychosomatic hallucinations, which are part of the gameplay, though it is questionable if these are hallucinations. Blake goes back to his childhood when he is in 4th grade and friends with Lynn and Jessica. Blake had found Jessica, had hanged herself. Jessica had left a suicide note where she said Blake should have loved her. In these parts, there is a strange monster or a demon chasing after Blake with a pulsating tongue around the school. Death is immediate by this demon, who proceeds to rip Blake's throat or cut out with its protruding tongue. There is also a man's voice whose Jessica warns Blake against in the school. Blake realizes now he has to take the long way to the mines. This way leads through this cult, who are severely sick cultists that have been cast out of the temple gate. Apparently, they have been sick with gonorrhea and syphilis due to the North and his people inbreeding and having odd sexual practices, in which incest is also encouraged. In one earlier note of the game, which Blake finds in the town's central square, it is hinted that North has syphilis. North sends 2 men, Paul and Simone, to get medication from the outside world. These excursions are not necessarily for medication, but also supplies like gas, which the cultists themselves cannot make. However, North has lied to these men, saying his medication are just studying aids. When Paul relays this to their supplier, the young man laughs and states that the only thing North must have been studying is the gas. Paul is afraid to question North himself directly, as any opposition leads to either torture or death. North and the others indiscriminately have sex with many women, leading to the spreading of STDs. However, a North has medication for his syphilis, which he does not share with the others. The people who manifest this sickness is in horrible sores and gradual decomposition of flesh are sent to a secluded part of the forest. They are told to await salvation. The scholars are saying that what they have in the sickness of the soul, a manifestation of their physical sins, and that is not a gonorrhea or syphilis, but there are members of the cult who know these are the STDs. A note shows a woman named Athalia talking to Simone about penicillin, and they try to escape this quarantine. People trying to escape or ask questions about their disease are eventually killed by Laird and Nick. Laird is a small, deformed man who rides on the back of Nick. Nick, a silent but strong figure. Laird is a deacon who himself is sick with STDs and is told to control and gauge up the sick. However, there are notes scattered throughout this suggest that the sick questions Note's gospel, and there are signs of a mutiny. While traversing through the encampment, Laird captures Blake. Laird calls Blake the Scald Messiah and proceeds to crucify him. Laird believes that Blake must be crucified and buried to gain resurrection. Laird also takes Blake's camera because he believes a modern Messiah will use this as his gospel and not a book. Blake painfully takes out his nails and runs after Laird in a grueling forest segment. After getting his camera back, there is another school segment in which Blake must escape the demon. Blake then again comes back to the present, where he is chased by Laird and Nick. Eventually, they catch him again, state that he must finish his gospel, and proceeds to bury him alive. Blake escapes and keeps on going to the mines. In one such area where he needs to rope to climb down, Laird corners him, but his own people push him off. It was hinted that many did not like him and Nick, killing both of them. Blake keeps on moving to the mines. He must cross a lake to do so, though the lake is filled with dead bodies and people committing suicide. In fact, cultist documents reveal that getting close to the mines actually disorients people and makes them see visions that are disturbingly sexual and violent. It is in one corner of the lake that Blake can find a very important document which gives an idea what is happening. The author of the note calls the cultists as subjects and has casually made pets with colleagues such as Jenny Rowland and Jennifer Rowland from the Outlast. Remember the scientist I talked about before, on how the subject will react to certain radio frequencies. However, the author also seems to be affected by the radio frequencies. It is severely implied that the Murkoff Corporation is behind what is happening at Temple Gate. Blake uses a raft to get across the lake, though he gets toppled over during the journey. The blinding light suddenly came out of nowhere and seemingly brought its tide. Now, the demon from his hallucinations is in the water and tries to drown him. Blake escapes, but as he approaches the mine's entrance, Blake again is transported back to his childhood. This time, he is underwater in the swimming pool. The monster chases him, and he gets out to be brought back to the present again. However, he sees it's raining blood. Blake is then chased by heretics, but finally makes it to the elevator downwards. Down in the mines, Blake thinks the demon is chasing him at times only to disappear. Eventually, Blake is captured by Val. Val is wearing a crown of thorns and is naked but covered with mud. She tries to molest Blake, but there is a cave in, and Blake now must escape. After escaping Val for a bit, Blake keeps on going further only for some heretics to catch him and drug him. He sees a pregnant Lynn tied up while surrounded by heretics, partaking in what appears to be an orgy. Val then straddles Blake, and it's implied by some reviewers that she either molests or rapes him. During this traumatic episode, players finally go back to Blake's past. He seems to be pinned down by Jessica. It is hinted that Jessica wants to kiss him, but Blake doesn't really want to, so she gets off and just wants to hang out with him in his house. They are found by Father Loutermilch, Loutermilk then makes Jessica and Blake come into class and interrogates them, and if they were doing something wrong, Jessica pleads Blake to stay, which makes Loutermilk more suspicious, and he keeps on shaming Jessica and Blake. Though Blake tries to explain that he was not necessarily being flirty or romantic with Jessica, Loutermilk shames him and tells him to go home, albeit Jessica telling him to stay. When Blake does try to go home, he hears Jessica scream. He sees Loutermilk chase a running Jessica, who is screaming and telling him to leave her alone. Blake runs after them, hoping to help Jessica. Blake soon comes to a door, opens it to see a battered and bruised Jessica near a stairway. Loutermilk says that this is not what it looks like. It is implied that Loutermilk had physically and sexually assaulted Jessica and in a tussle pushed her off the stairway. Throughout the game, Loutermilk's voice sometimes appears as a way to keep Blake silent of what he saw. Loutermilk had framed Jessica's death as a suicide, as a way to escape culpability. It is also implied that the demon who chases Blake is a mutilated and ghastly version of Father Loutermilk. Blake wakes up and sees that the cultists have attacked the heretics, and he runs and finds Lynn. Lynn is pregnant and she is about to give birth, and Blake, though not understanding how this is possible, says he will protect her and the child. Lynn mentions that it is his, though Blake earlier in the game stated they haven't had sex in months. The sun also seems to become like a giant star, reaching supernova as morning is coming and the world seems to be dying. Blake and Lynn keep on moving, only to encounter Martha. In the final chase, Martha almost corners them, but then the storm suddenly brings a church cross down and impales her. Blake and Lynn go into a church, and Lynn gives birth to a girl and dies. Blake starts crying and cradles the newborn while passing out. When he wakes up, he sees Noth, who chastises him for not killing the Antichrist off sooner. Noth does not understand why God is silent with him now, especially when he had perfect faith enough to kill his own children and his followers. Noth then says that though God does not listen to dead men, he hopes he answers them and slit his own throat. Blake gets out with the infant and sees that the town is burned, as well as seeing hundreds of the cultists lying down dead. The cultists have committed suicide by drinking hydrogen peroxide and cyanide. As he keeps on walking, the sun grows immensely and engulfs him and the land around him. Blake then wakes up as a kid in his school and hears Jessica calling out to him. He finds her as she says she will never let him go, as he knows he won't leave her ever again. She kneels down in a prayer, and so does Blake. She starts saying a prayer as the game ends. The Wall Rider destroys Murkoff's radio towers in Templegate. 7 hours later, the destruction. Pauline, Glick, and a Murkoff cleanup crew arrives. The only survivors found is Blake, now in a catatonic state. Pauline orders him to be taken away to the Ilrich Black Site facility to be interrogated with morphogenic engine-compatible technology. Meanwhile, Paul Marion being abducted by Simon Peacock. It is safe to theorize that it is suggested that because of his daughter's kidnapping, he turned against Pauline, which resulted in them having the shootout that severely wounded him. That Pauline Gling found Paul Marion with Simon Peacock, and she thought they are on together, and because Simon Peacock have Marion daughter with him, he had to protect Simon. But a shootout ensued, ended up in Simon Peacock's death and a severe injury on Marion's head. His daughter is nowhere to be found, and with that theory we understand why Paul Marion has switched sides and gone to the FBI to confess his crimes in the service of the corporation while being treated for a head wound. Later on, Pauline Glick recovers at a Murkoff rehabilitation center with a wounded arm and tells the mitigation agents hunting down Paul her side of the story. So that makes us theorize that maybe maybe in the next game we're gonna play as Paul Marion, or maybe as Blake again. I wonder where they're going with the story, because it's heavily implied that the comics are related to the game, so they are all connected together.